There is a specific, sickening sound that a heavy-duty trash bag makes when it hits a wet lawn from a second-story window. It's a dull, plastic thud that vibrates through the ground. I was standing in the driveway of the house I had grown up in, wearing the same black suit I had worn to my father's funeral less than 24 hours ago. My shoes were still muddy from the cemetery. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as bag after bag came flying out of my old bedroom window. My flannel shirts, my collection of vintage sci-fi novels, the framed photos of my mother holding me as a baby. They landed in the mud, one after another, treated like absolute garbage. And standing in the window, framing herself like the queen of a conquered kingdom, was Linda, my stepmother. She was holding a lit cigarette in one hand and clutching the lapels of my dead father's silk robe with the other. She looked down at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. "You have 20 minutes, Jason," she called out, her voice scratching against the damp morning air. "I want this trash off my property. I have a realtor coming at noon to take photos for the listing. This is my house now, and I don't want your clutter ruining the curb appeal." I didn't scream. I didn't throw a rock at the window. I didn't even cry. I just stood there and looked at her. I looked at the house, a beautiful, sprawling Victorian with white siding and a wraparound porch that my mother had bought with her inheritance 30 years ago. I looked at the massive oak tree in the front yard that I climbed as a boy, the one where my dad had hung a tire swing that was long gone now. And then I looked at Linda. She was so sure of herself. She had spent the last 5 years waiting for this moment. She had been counting the days, waiting for my father's heart to finally give out so she could cash in her lottery ticket. She thought she had won the jackpot. She thought she was the undisputed owner of the estate. But she had made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. She assumed that because she was the wife, she was the owner. She never bothered to read the fine print of a document signed 15 years ago. She never bothered to ask whose name was actually on the deed. To understand the level of satisfaction I felt in that moment and the sheer magnitude of the justice that was about to rain down on her, you have to understand the history. You have to understand Linda. My father married her 2 years after my biological mother, Eleanor, passed away from ovarian cancer. My mother was the backbone of our family. She was smart, she was kind, and she came from what people call old money. She wasn't flashy about it. She drove a station wagon and volunteered at the library. But she was the one who bought the house. She was the one who set up the college funds. She was the one who managed the investments. My father was a good man, a high school history teacher, but he was soft. He wore his heart on his sleeve. When Mom died, he was shattered. He was lost in a fog of grief, so thick he couldn't see 3 feet in front of him. And Linda? Linda was a shark who smelled blood in the water. She met him at a grief support group, of all places. She wasn't grieving anyone. She was hunting. She was 15 years younger than him. She had a history of maxed-out credit cards, 3 failed marriages, and vague stories about bad luck in her past. She moved in within 3 months of meeting him. And slowly, methodically, she isolated him. It was subtle at first. "Oh, Jason, don't come over for Sunday dinner this week. Your father is tired." Then it became, "We're changing the locks for security. Call before you come." Then it was, "We need to borrow some money from your trust fund, Jason, just for a renovation." She cut off his friends. She made the old buddies from the lodge feel unwelcome until they stopped coming around. She spent his pension on designer purses and investments in multi-level marketing schemes that never went anywhere. She treated me like a guest in my own home. "Jason, wipe your feet," she would snap as soon as I walked in. "Jason, don't eat that. I'm saving it for guests." "Jason, you can't stay the night. We need our privacy." My father, bless his heart, just wanted peace. He hated conflict. He would look at me with sad, tired eyes and say, "Please, son, just get along with her. For me, she makes me happy." So I did. I bit my tongue until it bled. I watched her spend my mother's money. I watched her redecorate the house, painting over my mother's favorite pale blue walls with soulless beige and gray. I watched her sell my mother's piano. I waited. The funeral was yesterday. It was a gray, drizzly Tuesday. It was a somber affair. My father had a lot of friends, old students, fellow teachers, the mechanic down the street. Who truly loved him? I cried. I stood by the open grave and felt a piece of my history disappear into the ground. I felt like an orphan. But Linda? Linda didn't shed a single tear. She wore a black dress that was a little too tight, a little too short, and a little too expensive. She spent the entire service on her phone. I saw her screen reflection in her sunglasses. She wasn't texting condolences to family. She wasn't reading scripture. She was on Zillow. She was looking up the estimated market value of the house. $1.2 million. I saw the greed in her eyes. It was naked and ugly. She wasn't burying a husband. She was liquidating an asset. At the wake, held a local diner because she refused to host it at the house. Too much mess, she said. She was already talking about downsizing and moving to a condo in Florida. She was loudly telling my father's cousin about how hard it was going to be to manage her estate alone. She looked at me across the buffet table, holding a glass of wine, and smirked. It was a look that said, I won. You lost. Deal with it. She knew I knew what she was. And she didn't care because she thought she held all the cards. She thought the ring on her finger was a title deed. This morning, I woke up in the guest room. I had stayed over because I was too exhausted to drive home after helping clean up the wake. I came downstairs at 8 a.m. to find my coffee mug in the trash and Linda standing in the kitchen with a yellow legal pad. Jason, she said, not even looking up from her list. I need you out. Today. By noon. I stared at her, blinking the sleep out of my eyes. Linda, we just buried him yesterday. Can we not do this right now? I need to go through his papers, his books. She slammed the notepad down on the marble counter. It's my house, Jason. My house. Your father left everything to me. I'm his sole beneficiary. I don't want you rummaging through my things. Read the will if you want. It's ironclad. Now get your stuff and get out, or I'm throwing it out. I try to reason with her. Linda, legally, I have tenancy rights if I've been staying. She laughed. You don't live here. You're a guest, and the guest is evicted. Get packing. And that brings us back to the driveway, to the trash bags, to the moment she threw my life onto the lawn. I gathered the bags in silence. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a fight. I put the muddy clothes in my trunk. I put the books in the back seat. I checked my watch. 9:15 a.m. Linda yelled from the window one last time. And don't come back without an appointment. I'm changing the locks at noon. I got into my car, a sensible 4-year-old sedan parked on the street. I started the engine, but I didn't drive away. I drove around the corner, out of sight of the house, and parked under a large elm tree. I turned off the engine. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a thick red folder. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew exactly what was in it. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved long ago. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was my mother's lawyer. He is 82 years old now. He wears bow ties and suspenders. He still uses a dictaphone, but his mind is sharper than a razor blade. He answered on the first ring. Jason, my boy, my deepest condolences again. I saw the obituary. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Mr. Henderson, I said, watching a squirrel run across the hood of my car. But we have a situation. Linda is evicting me. She's throwing my things on the lawn. She says the house is hers. She says Dad left it to her in his will. Mr. Henderson chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound like old parchment crinkling. I see. Linda has made an assumption. A very common, very expensive assumption. I took a deep breath. Just to be clear, Mr. Henderson, I need to hear it from you. The trust held the deed, correct? Correct, Henderson said, his voice shifting into his professional, courtroom baritone. Your mother, Eleanor, was a brilliant woman, Jason. She loved your father, but she knew he was susceptible to influence. She wanted to protect the family assets. When she passed, she placed the house into the Eleanor Holloway Family Trust. She granted your father a life estate. Do you remember me explaining that to you when you turned 21? I remember, I said, but explain it to me like I'm a jury member, just so I'm 100% sure. Certainly, Henderson said. A life estate means your father had the right to live in the property, to use it, and to enjoy it for the duration of his natural life. He was responsible for taxes and upkeep. However, he did not own the property in fee simple. He was essentially a tenant with a lifetime lease. He could not sell it. He could not mortgage it beyond his life interest. And most importantly, he could not leave it in a will. I got into my car, a sensible 4-year-old sedan parked on the street. I started the engine, but I didn't drive away. I drove around the corner, out of sight of the house, and parked under a large elm tree. I turned off the engine. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a thick red folder. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew exactly what was in it. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved long ago. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was my mother's lawyer. He is 82 years old now. He wears bow ties and suspenders. He still uses a dictaphone, but his mind is sharper than a razor blade. He answered on the first ring. Jason, my boy, my deepest condolences again. I saw the obituary. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Mr. Henderson, I said, watching a squirrel run across the hood of my car. But we have a situation. Linda is evicting me. She's throwing my things on the lawn. She says the house is hers. She says Dad left it to her in his will. Mr. Henderson chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound like old parchment crinkling. I see. Linda has made an assumption. A very common, very expensive assumption. I took a deep breath. Just to be clear, Mr. Henderson, I need to hear it from you. The trust held the deed, correct? Correct, Henderson said, his voice shifting into his professional, courtroom baritone. Your mother, Eleanor, was a brilliant woman, Jason. She loved your father, but she knew he was susceptible to influence. She wanted to protect the family assets. When she passed, she placed the house into the Eleanor Holloway Family Trust. She granted your father a life estate. Do you remember me explaining that to you when you turned 21? I remember, I said, but explain it to me like I'm a jury member, just so I'm 100% sure. Certainly, Henderson said. A life estate means your father had the right to live in the property, to use it, and to enjoy it for the duration of his natural life. He was responsible for taxes and upkeep. However, he did not own the property in fee simple. He was essentially a tenant with a lifetime lease. He could not sell it. He could not mortgage it beyond his life interest. And most importantly, he could not leave it in a will. Go ahead, I said, gesturing to the phone in her hand. Call them. In fact, put on speaker. She froze for a second. She expected me to beg. She expected me to say, no, please, Linda, let's work this out. When I challenged her, she hesitated. But her greed and her arrogance pushed her forward. She dialed 911. Yes, I have an emergency. I have a trespasser at 42 Maple Drive. He is refusing to leave. He is aggressive. I am a widow living alone. Please hurry. She hung up and smirked at me, blowing smoke in my direction. You're finished, Jason. You're going to jail. I hope you like prison food. We waited for 10 minutes. It was the longest 10 minutes of her life and the shortest of mine. The silence was heavy. Linda paced back and forth on the porch, muttering about how ungrateful I was. After everything I did for your father, she spat. I took care of him. I managed his meds. I deserve this house. You were never around. I didn't say a word. I just tapped the red folder on my knee, staring at the oak tree. Finally, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out. One was an older sergeant with gray hair, the other a younger rookie who looked nervous. They walked up the driveway, looking at the trash bags still strewn everywhere. Problem here, folks? The sergeant asked, eyeing Linda's cigarette and my muddy suit. Yes, officer, Linda screamed, running down the steps to meet them. This man is trespassing. This is my stepson. My husband died 2 days ago, and now he's trying to intimidate me. I told him to leave, and he won't go. I want him arrested for criminal trespass. The sergeant looked at me. He saw a man in a suit sitting calmly on a swing. He didn't see a threat. Is this true, sir? Have you been asked to leave? I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I walked down the steps to meet them. I have been asked to leave, Sergeant, but there is a significant misunderstanding regarding the ownership of the residence. Linda scoffed loudly. There is no misunderstanding. I am the wife. I have the will right here. She ran inside the house and came back waving a document. Look, I leave all my worldly possessions to my wife, Linda. It's right there. The house is mine. He's just a greedy son trying to steal from a widow. The sergeant took the will. He glanced at it. He nodded. Well, sir, if she's the beneficiary and the executor, and the house was in your father's name, she has the right to ask you to leave the premises. Civil disputes are for court, but if the owner wants you gone, you have to go. Linda beamed. She looked at me with pure malice. See, I told you. Cuff him. Take him away. Officer, I said, stepping forward, my voice low and respectful. May I show you a document as well, before you make an arrest? I handed him the red folder. My father's will is valid for his bank accounts, his car, and his personal effects. However, he could not bequeath this house because he did not own it. The sergeant frowned. He opened the folder. He looked at the deed. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the trust declaration. He read the paragraph regarding the life estate. The sergeant was quiet for a long time. He looked up at the house. He looked at the date on the deed, 2005. He looked at the date on the will, 2019. He understood real estate law enough to know what he was looking at. He showed the paper to the rookie. They whispered for a moment. The rookie's eyes went wide. The sergeant turned back to Linda. His demeanor had changed completely. It was no longer the polite patience reserved for domestic disputes. It was the authoritative tone of a man who sees the truth and realizes he almost made a miss. Ake, ma'am, the sergeant said, are you aware that this property is held in a trust? A what? Linda snapped. I don't care about trusts. I care about the will. My husband said the house was ours. Ma'am, the sergeant continued, louder this time, cutting her off. Your husband had a life estate. That means he was allowed to live here. It does not mean he owned it. According to this deed, which is filed with the county and notarized, the owner of this property is Jason Hull. Loai. Linda stopped moving. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on her reality. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. What? She whispered. That's a lie. That's a fake. Jason forged it. It's a certified copy, ma'am, the sergeant said, pointing to the raised seal. It predates the will by 15 years. He owns the building. He owns the land. Which means, he turned to me. Mr. Holloway, this is your property. Do you want this woman removed? The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Gable next door gasped audibly. Linda looked at me, her eyes wide with sudden, terrifying clarity. She looked at the house, her retirement, her payday, her status symbol, and she saw it evaporating like smoke. She saw the cruises she had planned disappearing. She saw the condo in Florida disappearing. She saw her entire future crumbling into dust. Jason, she stammered, her voice trembling. She took a step toward me, reaching out a hand. Jason, you can't. I'm your mother. Stepmother. We're family. Your father would want. Family, I asked, cutting her off. My voice was cold. Family doesn't throw my clothes out the window, Linda. Family doesn't check Zillow at a funeral. Family doesn't try to have me arrested in front of the neighbors. I looked at the sergeant. Officer, this woman is trespassing. She has no lease. She has no title. She has just admitted to attempting to sell property that does not belong to her, which sounds like fraud to me. However, I paused. I looked at Linda, who was now crying, real tears of financial panic. I'm not a monster. I am not her. I checked my watch. I will give her 24 hours. She can take her personal belongings, her clothes, her jewelry, and the furniture she bought with her own money. Everything else, my mother's furniture, the appliances, the art, the heirlooms, stays. If she is not out by 10 a.m. tomorrow, I want her arrested for trespassing. The sergeant nodded. That is very generous of you, sir. More than I would give. He turned to Linda. You heard the man. You have 24 hours. And ma'am, if you damage one light bulb, if you scratch one floorboard, If you take one spoon that isn't yours, we will be back. And it won't be a warning. Do you understand? Linda couldn't speak. She was shaking uncontrollably. She looked at the sergeant, then at me, then at the neighbors watching her humiliation. She realized she had played a game of poker against a dead woman, and she had lost everything. She nodded, sobbing into her hands. She turned and ran back into the house, my house, slamming the door behind her. I spent the next 24 hours at a hotel down the road. I didn't trust her. I hired a private security guard to sit in his car outside the house overnight. I told him to watch for moving trucks and to make sure she didn't strip the copper wiring or smash the windows. It cost me $300. It was worth every single penny for the peace of mind. At 9:55 a.m. the next morning, I pulled up to the house. A U-Haul truck was just pulling away. It wasn't full. She didn't have much to take. Linda was sitting in the passenger seat of her leased BMW, following the truck. She saw me standing in the driveway. She didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, a broken woman driving toward a very uncertain, very poor future. I walked into the house. It was quiet. The air smelled of stale cigarette smoke, but underneath that, I could smell the old wood and the dust, the smell of my childhood. The beige paint she had slapped on the walls seemed less oppressive now, knowing I could paint over it. I walked into the dining room. My mother's table was still there. I walked into the living room. My father's chair was still there. I walked upstairs to the room she had used as her office. It was empty. She had taken her computer and her shree. I walked to the window, the same window she had thrown my clothes from. I looked out at the oak tree. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a home that was finally, truly mine. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying for 5 years. The parasite was gone. The house belonged to the Holloways again. I called a contractor that afternoon. I need a full renovation, I told him. I want to restore the original colors. I want to strip the paint off the woodwork. I want to make it look like it did in 1995. He asked when I wanted to start. I looked at the photo of my mother on the mantel, one of the few Linda hadn't thrown out because it was in a heavy silver frame she couldn't lift easily. Start tomorrow, I said. I have a lot of trash to clean up. Linda tried to sue me a month later. She found a shady lawyer in a strip mall who tried to argue squatters' rights or constructive trust. He sent a threatening letter demanding half the value of the home. Mr. Henderson sent them one letter in response. One single 2-page letter outlining the fraud she had committed by spending my father's funds while acting as his caretaker and the clear, indisputable terms of the life estate. He also hinted that we would countersue for the rent she owed for the 24 hours she overstayed. We never heard from them again. The last I heard, Linda was living in a 1-bedroom apartment across town, working as a receptionist. She tells anyone who will listen about how her ungrateful stepson stole her inheritance and threw a grieving widow onto the street. But the neighbors know the truth. Mrs. Gable knows. The sergeant knows. The deed knows. And every time I walk through my front door, I know the truth. Justice is real. It doesn't always come with a sword. Sometimes, it comes with a red folder and a fine print clause written by a mother who loved her son enough to protect him from the grave.